Okay, let me go into another area, our phone conversations. We were talking about why a customer would share their data. And this loops back to what you do with it. You're both shaking your head. Who wants to talk first? Because I think it's a...
So I think, like you say, we had a really good conversation about why would a customer share their data. And the way I think about it is you have to have something in it for them. If you ask a question, and we've tried this a lot of times on Expedia, if we ask a customer a question and then we don't replay the value, then I think of that in terms of customers can now almost smell that they are just going to give you their email or their information for marketing purposes rather than actually to improve their experience.
Mm-hmm. In-flight, the situation is similar. If we ask a passenger to give up data, there's some expectation of getting something in return. It might be on an airline, a medium-sized airline, that giving your name or your age or certain demographics may give you the ability to log onto the system, but you're going to expect something in return and expect that data be handled respectfully.
Now, believe it or not, my whole world started with revenue management. There's an intersection here. How many years ago? Probably 7 years ago as a VP at SAS. We were talking to major cable and media companies about doing this, personalizing advertising and being able to charge different rates for the ad space if we could deliver it personalized into time periods that a target audience was watching and could give so much of a viewership. You believe that's possible on an airplane, that eventually, let's put this together, I get on the flight and it says, if you'll share this information, we'll give you personalized ads, things you might be interested in. And the reason I want to do that is I will get things that may be of interest and it creates more revenue.
I think it's definitely possible in in-flight. The in-flight traveler has a very desirable demographic, as do 4-star, 5-star hotel guests have very favorable demographics. That is worth something. And you're on a trip, and if there's the opportunity to get something that makes the trip a little easier, a little better, more amenities, I tend to be an amenity-driven passenger. My travel cut back a little bit last year, and I went into a club and I went into a hotel and was told that my gold status didn't get me into the lounge anymore, and I was very disappointed. So I might give up a little data in order to get into the lounge.
That's true.
Yeah.
For Expedia or online? Go ahead.
I think I would go back to being able to make sure that we are adding value at every stage. The idea of, say, in-flight entertainment personalization done wrong is sitting down in seat 3A and saying, hello, Stephen, and feeling very creeped out by that experience, or thinking, well, what if I just swap seats? How much of my information is sitting in somebody else's hands? And that doesn't make you feel very confident in terms of what you would then want to do with that carrier ever again. But if you could opt in a way that, to your point, said you can have free in-flight entertainment if you log in with your Google account and Facebook account. So the 1-minute video that we play is going to be very targeted. That's a very different conversation.
Do you ever see, because you guys, Expedia, you know where people are going, right? Obviously. They want the flight, they want the hotel. Could you ever be a platform for destination services willing to pay you to show that information to a customer that might be interested? Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we do it a lot when we think about activities. So 85% of activities are booked in trip. And increasingly, we can understand the profile of somebody who has booked a flight and a hotel and the group dynamic that they've booked in as to when to talk about, when they've landed, what they should get, and what they should be interested in buying. But the interesting dynamic there is they always research those things before they go. So tying those two experiences together in terms of in-trip personalization and pre-trip personalization is absolutely key in getting the context right, so that we don't recommend all activities to all people.
Mm-hmm. The bandwidth. Any questions? I'm not standing up here to look down over. I think I see a hand. It's because I can kind of see from here. Do we have the microphone in here to give for the question so other people can hear it? Thank you, Leo. The cube. Thank you for your question, sir. Go ahead.
So my question is around what Expedia may be doing to help personalize the customer acquisition or retention experience of your own site visitors and past customers?
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Do you mean in terms of the landing experience and what customers experience on site, or more sort of holistically?
I would say more holistically, and particularly once they've left and getting them back, because you guys are fighting against many, many competitors.
Yeah, and new customers versus repeat customers is a constant challenge. Obviously, we all want the repeat customers, but increasingly, customers they always want to make sure they get the best price. And so they validate that in multiple different ways, in multiple different places. So that means Expedia needs to be present in all of those places. And so the way we think about that is in terms of making sure that we have a presence there, and that our experience is as consistent as possible there. So, we make sure that we have the same pricing, the same landing experience, and then we recognize customers as much as we can when they land. So if they've previously been to us and used our site, I'll use the pool filters example. If it's for the same exact search, we may show them more pool photos, but if it's for a different search, we wouldn't want to do that, because that would just be guessing that pools is your favorite thing, which is incorrect.
Is there a follow-on to that or another question? I think we have a question over here. Thank you, Leo.
What metrics are you using to measure that customer value that you've been talking about in this presentation?
So we're really moving towards having typical conversion-based testing that we always have. And then what we're doing is evaluating outcome-based testing. So how do we evaluate a non-conversion-based customer? And I think we've seen in every presentation, Gina showed it from Google earlier, the customer journey. We know that if you go to 45 different websites before you buy, there is no way you're giving 45 different websites your email address. So we also know that you can't just use logging in or something, like a hard line. And so what we're trying to establish, and we haven't achieved it yet, is really working out what is it that isn't either a simple cohort or regression analysis that says that customers are fundamentally achieving what they want. I'll give you a very, very simple example of one way to look at it. Customers who use our maps and come back had a pleasing experience with our maps. So if we know that they're using those on search results, that's actually a behavior that's more sort of dreaming and researching than it is ready to buy, where we find maps are being used later down the path. So we may look at something like that.
Okay. For any other? I've got a question for you, Michael, while we see, and thank you for the questions from the audience. I feel a lot of my hand up here, but that's the only way I can see out there. Has there been any discussion? I travel an awful lot, like a lot of us. Delta, in particular, I live in Florida. There's a saying, when you die and go to heaven, you go through Atlanta, because all of our flights from West Palm go through there. They've got a lot of information on me. Has there been thought that when I get on a Delta flight, I may give permission to share my profile? The places I've been, the places I'm going? Go ahead.
Airlines are particularly sensitive about passenger data. There's always a question whenever airlines are doing business with third parties about who owns the data that's being collected. The airline likes to believe that they always own all the data, but once they establish ownership of that data, they treat it with a great deal of respect. So I think the industry is now looking at how can we take that data, begin to monetize it a little bit, but within the bounds of what is a respectful way to handle it. It's a lot of questions around that right now. I think it's one of the biggest questions facing the industry when we look at advertising and how to monetize the journey.
And I think you mentioned customers opting in to sharing their data at some point. That could be one way. If Delta just used my data, that would upset me. But if I can opt in to share it and then opt back out when I don't like it, it's giving the customer that power to control the use of their data. It's when we feel helpless that someone's got it.
Airlines tend to be one of the few industries left that tend to be a little conservative in terms of things such as manners. You get on board an airplane, you're rarely ever addressed as Michael, you're addressed as Mr. Childers. May not always be the case in hotels nowadays, and definitely a lot of other places where it isn't. So airlines tend to be a little bit on the conservative side there. So I think that the airlines will be conservative with the use of that particular data as well. I think on one of our phone calls, Mark had mentioned that if you get in seat 3A and immediately somebody says, "Hey, Mike, how are you?" The reaction to that is very different than if the screen says to you, "Pardon me, do you happen to be Mr. Childers? Or am I speaking to Mr. Childers, et cetera?" So,
And that's interesting, because when I log into my rooms, many times the screen says, "Welcome, Steve."
yes.
But that's not in a public setting. I guess that's the difference.
It may have to do with the culture of the industry and the culture of the particular airline.
Yeah, I would also add that I think that, taking a flight you're very, very aware of the amount of security around you through the airport. Every part of it has a secure feeling. And so I think that is also tied to that experience about sort of where your data is in the public domain.
Okay. Have any questions come up from out? Nope. Any final thoughts?
Our association and our industry is very much interested in moving ahead with this and making it part of some sort of a broader program. So anyone here who has an interest in looking into what we're doing and assisting us with it or partnering with us, we would be very happy to hear from you.
Okay, awesome.
Just thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope this was useful.
I think it was a great session. Thank you very much.